have to. I forgot. We're good.
Wait, are we using the alphabet too?
Are you endowing squares?
Awesome.
What, Asher Chaya?
No, I asked if you're endowing squares.
Oh, yeah.
Very cute. Nameplates.
Nehemiah, Shabbat Shalom, welcome back.
It's so funny, Asher Chaim. I was literally about to say the same thing. We talked about Nehemiah last night. Somebody came to my Shabbat table and said, "Where's Nehemiah been?"
Do we know?
Actually, she said Nehemiah, so I said Nehemiah.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Where was he?
I don't know. We are Aries' friend. Where did he go?
Nehemiah, you're well? Nehemiah?
ברוך השם כל יום,
Excellent.
וכל לילה, ושאני רואה את כולכם. בחזרה.
Glad to hear it.
Alhamdulillah.
Okay. Should we screen share the bracha?
Bracha, I don't have.
No, but
Maybe Michaela has
Michaela
it.
can screen share it now.
If she has it. She might not have it. She's
Wait,
not,
where's the tarot cards?
I know, we only try, during our Chazon Masters, I always have, we have an opening with the tarot cards. All right, good morning, folks. We're happy and excited to be with you, but we're also just, as this Shabbat would happen, which I didn't know, we're actually welcoming back Michaela. Just this one time was our moderator for throughout the pandemic.
Yep.
And those of you who know how amazing Michaela is, it was really, I was excited to see Michaela's name there. I thought it was maybe an old, and then it was Michaela's voice from Brussels. I thought, oh my goodness, there's Michaela. Okay, hi Michaela. So welcome.
I call her Michaela. What's the right name?
I think it's Michaela. I don't know. Michaela, why don't you tell us what I should be calling you, or we should be calling you?
Yeah, the Hebrew version is nice. Thank you. And I can't get the slide. I'm very sorry.
Oh, don't worry about it.
Okay.
Okay,
A little
Michaela.
glitch.
Good to hear your voice today. Really wonderful.
And so tell us, is it Michaela or Michaela?
She's at the Hebrew.
The Hebrew, Michaela. Okay, Michaela.
Brownie out there?
Yefeh me'od. Yefeh me'od. Okay, so we'll make the blessing here, and people can jump in. Okay, so let's do it together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok
B'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. Take it away, Rabbi Diane. Let me bring up the text here. And the text should also be in your in the chat area as a link and also as a PDF. Here it is.
So today's study from Parshat Noach, and I think we all know, or most of us know, the story of the flood. Today we'll be exploring the role of the birds, the raven, and the dove. And I have to say, Rabbi Ingber and I had such a great time exploring this. Like we went on a couple of day hunt into what these birds symbolize and represent. And there's so much here, and it feels endless, and it feels like we could have done so much, right? We could have continued. So we're just going to give you, try to share what we learned, and we're looking forward to hear how this, so to speak, lands with you.
Exactly. Well, it's also
how the birds land.
How the birds land.
It's all about the bird landing.
It's all about the landing of the birds. We it's for years. I just want to say, for years I wanted to give. I won't remember. So maybe Eden would probably remember. I don't remember if I ever talked about this before. I forget what I said in the last couple weeks. I saw Eden, but I probably have spoken about it before. But every year I want to do a deep dive, as it were, into this part of the Noah story. But I needed great chavruta in Rabbi Kolas.
And it's so interesting because I've never paid attention to these birds, not really. And Rabbi Ingber mentioned them. We have 5 topics on the table, and then some of the birds kept drawing us in. So here we are. Okay, so the birds. Okay, by Yizkor Elohim, I'm in source 2. Source 1 kind of outlines what we're aiming to do here. Source 2, Genesis 8, 1 through 12. So we've gone through God's disappointment with the world, God's destruction of the world, God's kind of, a little bit, as I studied years ago from a rabbi named James Pinette, kind of being in love with Noah being the saving grace of the world. We've gone through all that. And here we're towards the end of the flood, and God remembers Noah and all the animals and all the wild beasts asher ito b'teva that were with Noah in the teva. V'ya'aver Elohim ruach al haaretz, and God sort of passed over a wind on the earth, and of course this reminds us of Genesis and God's spirit mirachefet al hamayim, God's spirit hovering on the water. Vayasoku hamayim, so the waters were abated. The waters abated because of this spirit or wind. Vayisachru mayanot tahom v'arubot hashamayim. The well springs of ocean and the sluices of heaven were dammed up. I love this imagery. And again, this, echoes the language of creation. V'yikaleh hageshem min hashamayim. The torrent from the heavens was held back. And this is Everett Fox's beautiful translation. So now we are in verse 3. Vayeshuvu hamayim, by the way, jump in. Vayeshuvu hamayim me'al haaretz haloch v'shov. The waters return from upon the earth, advancing and returning. So there's this kind of, literally back and forth motion and movement. Vayachzuru hamayim miksei chamishim ma'at yom. And the waters diminished at the end of 150 days. But Tanach Hateva, the ark came to rest. I like that image. Which
is also by the Vayanach Bayom HaShvi'i, where it says in Shabbos that God rested on the seventh day. Now the ark, which is of course like as Rabbi Kolaretz pointed out, the ark imagery is very much connected to the creation of a new world, to the woming of a new world. And a lot of we know that because of some of the linguistic cues that, like, just like with the Mishkan later on in the Torah and Book of Exodus, the author of the Torah is trying to draw attention to these parallels between the creation of the world and the recreation of the world here. And Batanach, which also is the word Noach in it, and he rested, right? Noach, Batanach, like not the Tanakh, by the way, is in the Tanakh, which is the Bible. It's with a different letter at the end. It's a chet versus a chaf. But Tanakh means, and it rested on the seventh month, right? So this is also very linguistically powerful.
So the ark came to be like Noah. The ark came to...
The ark Noah.
The ark Noah, right. Okay,
Nice.
Beautiful. So it came to rest on this mountain called Ararat. V'hamayim, verse 5, hayu haloch v'chasor. So the water was sort of going back and retreating ad hachodesh ha'asiri until the 10th month, v'asiri le'achad lachodesh, on the 11th day, nir'u rashei ha'harim, so the tops of the mountains were seen. Okay, 6. Vayehi miketz arba'im yom, and after 40 days, vayivtach Noach et chalon teva, and Noach opened up the window of the ark.
Which we don't know about, by the way. There's no chalon mentioned unless we see it as the Zohar, by the way.
Right.
Like, so this chalon.
I was just wondering about that.
Yeah.
The chalon is the Zohar.
It seems to be like earlier on when the Torah describes how he built the teva, they built the ark. He says Sohar tasel teva. God says, make it Sohar. We don't really know what that word means. Sahar means something illuminate or luminous, but it doesn't say chalon. But here, there's a chalon. So it seems that there's a big opinions about what that Sohar was. Some say it was a chalon. They probably got it from this. Some others say it was a jewel that was, right. So beautiful. It's a chalon.
Asher asad that he had made. Yeshalach. Okay, now
this
here
is
we
where it
get to
gets-
the birds. Now we're going to pay real close
Oops.
attention. Oops.
Yeah, whoops.
7. Yeshalach et ha'orev. And Noach
Verse 7.
sent the raven. Vayetze yatso vashov. It went off, going and returning. Ad Yivoshet Hamayim Me'ar, until the waters were dried up from the earth, from upon the earth. So this is interesting. So he sends the raven off, and the raven goes back and forth until when? Until the drying up of the land, right? So one would assume that that's when the raven stopped going back and forth, and that was a sign that there was sufficient dry land as a sign by which to emerge from the ark.
Right.
Right?
It seems like pretty clear from that verse. If you don't know anything that's coming next, you're thinking, first of all, if you don't know anything about birds, you're thinking, okay, he chose this bird because clearly there's a reason for this bird. It's kind of a bird that does this, right? This is like the bird that knows how to let you know when the water, right? So yeah, so this verse seems to point to this mission.
But it doesn't say why Noah sent out the Ark. Noah sent out the Ark.
Right, it doesn't say why, but by the way, we wouldn't have been bothered by that until the next verse, because we would have thought, we know why he sent it out, because it says he wants, there's something we would have presumed or
it says what the raven
imputed.
does.
Right.
Right.
Imputed that there's something about this bird that, which is, I think, the way most of us read it. It's like, oh yeah, they sent out a bird.
In order for this to happen.
In order, right, to know something that we would not otherwise have been able to get. He needed that information, and only a bird. Why the Orev? Because the Orev knows how to do that. That would have been our assumption, I think, if we read or just kind of in a cursory way. I think it's also, I mean, I think a lot of us would have been thinking, why don't you just look out your window? Just look out your window.
There's a window.
There's a window. You open it.
Why do we need a bird?
Exactly. Like, what's the bird going to tell him that he can't tell for himself? Like, can I get out? It's like, why does he have to know if the water is all of, is there some kind of long distance information he knows? Or like, what's going on?
Why is he sending out a bird?
Right. Why is it, unless it's really high up? I mean, I don't know, but.
Now, it could be Vishalach et Orev. We didn't have the rest of the sentence. Maybe we want to get rid of the Orev. Done with the Orev. Done with the raven.
That's something that we might not have thought about, but I love that. Yes.
Right? Done with the raven. And this is what the raven does. The raven doesn't want to leave until the land is dry.
Right. Let me get rid of this Orev, whatever this bird is.
This is a purgation ritual, so to speak.
If it's too clear, it wouldn't be mystical.
Yes.
What's too clear would be mystical. Exactly. And you see how as rabbis do, and rabbis in the tradition have done, every word becomes meaningful, but especially when you compare this verse to the next verse. So let's look at the next verse, which is very different and exactly the same. Okay. Vishalach et hayonah, and he sent out the yonah. Okay, same words except Orev and yonah, raven, dove. Me'ito, now it's where it gets different, right? Me'ito, from him. So there was a dove with him. So what does that conjure up? Right? He's like, he had this pet dove. He walked around the ark, it was on his shoulder. He petted the dove. Like, he had a dove, right? He had a connection with
like some of the people we see walking here. Like playing. He's like a New Yorker. Kind of like,
walking around with a
parrot on his shoulder. Like a snake.
He had a pet dove. Right. Okay, so why does he send out the yonah? Now we're told there's a reason. Lirot, hakalu, and this is different language for the drying up of the water on the earth, and I'm not sure what the difference in the language indicates. Hakalu hamayim, did the water on the face of the earth subside? And did it subside?
It's also 5 words, it's the same rhythmic, like ad yivoshet here, right? Ad yivoshet hamayim ala aretz. Right? And it's aretz, not adama.
Aha.
And here it's hakalu hamayim me'al pnei adama. Right? So it's, one is very much, they're just very different. I mean, they're very different and they're the same rhythm.
And one is aretz and one is adama.
One is aretz and pnei adama.
Which is interesting.
It's just wild. This verse seems, I'm sorry.
No, okay.
No, I was gonna say that one could easily say, and that's what we mentioned, we surface this in our company, like maybe the simplest way to say this is that there are two versions of the story and radically different versions of the flood story. It's an ancient tale that also
different authors are right. So
are trying to be stitched together here in a way that's less than elegant. And it just raises all kinds of questions because you have just like, we would put the onus of ambiguity on the editor's, let's say, lack of editorial skill, as it were. Like, you're stitching it together. You didn't really, notice this. So we kind of surface that. It's always an answer that can be given depending on what seminary you go to or what you're, but it doesn't really offer us anything by way of, okay, now what do we do with it, right?
So the question is this a work of supreme artistry, divine or human, but which invites us to read it as like, oh my God, every word is meaningful.
Right.
Or did it happen to get stitched together? It was like, oh, rave and dove, who cares? It's all the same thing.
Right.
Right. Okay. But now look at this.
So we're taking the latter and not the former, even if the former might be objectively true and might be the most elegant answer, but the latter is the one that is
more interesting. You wouldn't be here if we just said, oh, what the hell?
Exactly.
Stitch it together.
Right, exactly.
Okay, close the computer.
We're done.
Bye.
Exactly. So that's not the way we roll.
Now look at this. This is really interesting. Because in verse 7 is the whole story of the raven, beginning and end. Right? Beginning of the verse, beginning of the story, end of the verse, end of the story. But now comes on a little journey of the Yonah, right? So, because basically the same thing happens.
Basically.
The same thing happens, and it's completely different. The lo matzah Yonah manoach l'chaf ragla, and the Yonah did not find rest. But again, you hear that word Noah, right? She didn't find Noah for her feet, right?
This word here.
Not rest, not land. It doesn't say land. It says Noah. Wow.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful because in a way it feels to me like she's going out to look for Noah in the land, but she doesn't find Noah. So she comes back. She comes back to him, El Hativa.
Or no, say Elav.
I'm sorry, Elav, El Hativa. So she comes back to him. It doesn't have to say comes back to him.
Come back to the Teva.
Profoundly relational.
It's so relational.
Right?
I was just like,
You
she said something.
have to pick it up because I'm laughing too hard.
There's water on the face of the earth. And by the way, also another thing to add, there's nothing. The word panim only appears when it comes to the Yonah. Talk about relationship. The word panim, the face of the earth.
Wow.
Right? First it's the face, first the face of the Adamah, then the face of the earth. There's a lot of like this relational piece.
Right. Adamah is also the first and the second verse of Bereshit.
Right.
Of Genesis 1.
A lot of like the relational language. Vayishlach yado. Now this is completely absurd. The Torah goes out of its way now to tell us not only does the dove come back to Noah, but Noah is waiting for the dove, and he extends his arm, and his arm. By the way, the word used for his arm to be sent is the same word used for sending away the birds. Right? He sends his arm. Like as it's on a mission. His mission is to meet this bird. Vayishlach yado. And Vayikachei takes her, right? And Vayaveo elav, and he brings her to him. El Teva. Again, some completely absurd that none of this is with the Orev. And it's so, as one scholar that we were looking at from Yeshiva in Israel pointed out, these are almost the exact words used when it comes to kind of a romantic relationship between Isaac and Rebecca. And in other places in Torah, it's like almost like there's some kind of profound intimacy that's happening between Yonah and Noah and the dove. And it's like the use of this language is so markedly different than the language, the lack of language used by the Orev. It's almost like there's a proliferation, almost a fecundity of language used around the Yonah. And with the Orev, it was like one sentence and one and done.
Right.
And then it goes on. Now we have 3 stages of this, right? So he sent out the dove, and then in verse 10,
so Noah waited another 7 days, but it also sounds like the language of Shabbat, right? Vayosef shalach et hayonah min hateva. So again, an additional time, Noah sends the dove from the ark. But havo elav hayonah le'et erev, and the Yonah came to him at the time of the evening. Now we'll see that erev and Elav. I'm sorry, what did I say?
It comes back to Elav also.
Right. Right. She comes back to him again. At the time of the evening, and erev and orev are from the same root. So the raven and evening are from the same root.
Right, to around the Orev time, right?
Around the Orev time, right? That liminal time, that crossing time,
crossing time
between day and night. Yeah. And behold, v'hinei alei zayit taraf b'fiha. There is an olive branch in her mouth. But the word that's used here for sort of plucked is taraf, which is the same word used for how animals eat dead bodies, treifot. Right, treifot is the word, the noun used for dead bodies.
It's like carrion.
So now the dove is acting like the raven, even though she's only eating an olive branch. Right, so it's at the time that sounds like a raven, and she's acting like a raven. So there's this olive branch in her mouth. The Yada Noach kalu hamayim me'ar. And then Noach knew that the waters had subsided from upon the earth or the land. And he waited another 7 days, 7 days further. Ishalach et hayonah. And he sent the dove, the lo yaspa shuv elav od, and she did not return to him anymore. So that's the end of the relationship between Noah and the dove. Very sweet relationship between them.
So much going on here. First of all, like in the last couple of verses, I'm sorry, besides going to before we go back to like the lower level of criticism or level of the higher level here is that if you notice that there are 3 stages. Right, and so he sends out the bird, and she comes back to him. Then he sends her out again for another 7 days, and she brings back the second stage. She brings back the olive branch, and then in the third stage, she doesn't come back. She comes back once, nothing. She comes back twice with the olive branch, which becomes, of course, a symbol of peace, right, or like the end of the painful episode of catastrophe. And then there's the time where she just doesn't come back, which is unique, by the way, also because generally speaking, the Yonah was considered to be a bird that always came home, as it were. It was almost like a homing pigeon, but like almost was always coming back to the hearth or back to the place where it began, which is significant. Also, other little things here on a more lower level, like in terms of the language, that no one knows. Also, like
I was just going to say that.
Great. And he knew, and no one knew. Also very intimate language of intimacy, right? To know is
also with the raven. There's no knowing.
There's no knowing.
There's no message that Noah received with the raven.
Nothing. As if they're not even like there's no communication whatsoever. And lastly, I'll just say that the repetition of the word 2 words are really 3 words is really instructive for later on in the Torah, the book of Genesis, in a different story about a different one who didn't come back, which is Yosef. But the story of Yosef, the word Yosef here appears at least, I think it's 2 or 3 times. And he then sent her out again. He sent her out again. And the word achirim and od, right, which is others, or he says here, another 7 days, right? So Joseph also sent the brothers back a couple of times. There's a lot in here that is about, right, the end of the period of exile, the end of the period of alienation, and the bird that has been sent away, that is the peaceful bird, as it were, but that had to learn the language of the raven in order to survive, and then so on. So there's a lot going on here on every level, but what's, I think, striking for Rabbi Kolorestis and myself was obviously the differential between the Orev and the Yonah, in addition to the Yonah's stage-like unfolding, that whole story, but like also what happened to the Orev, and how is the story depicting the Orev, meaning the raven, and whether or not, like, did the Orev have a mission? What was the meaning of that first verse, the verse 7 back here on Vayishalach Orev Vayetze Yatzov Hashov? This one here, what about the raven? And can we learn, at least in the way that the rabbis in the later tradition try to imagine the mystery of the opaque nature of that first verse? You want to go to that, or you want to? So let's just look here at the way Rashi, I'm sure there are plenty of comments in the chat area, but I just want to see what Rashi says. We see that first verse, and then we can go. Is that okay? We can go. Then we'll go to a couple of comments.
I just have a question.
Clarification. Okay.
Yeah, what does Yosef mean in this?
Yosef means again and yet again.
Yeah.
But Yosef again, another, an additional time, as it were. Right. So here, Rashi in the 11th century, Rashi will quote the Talmud, which of course is earlier than Rashi. In understanding the Orev, or the raven's mission, it seems just to remind ourselves, the raven goes out and back. Vayetze Yatzov Hashov. He goes out to go out and then return. Ad Yivoshet Hamayim, until the drying up of the land. So Rashi says here in source number 3 on your page, he went forth to and fro. Haloch olech umakif sivot hateva. So Rashi reads the Gemara in Sanhedrin says that the raven went out and went around the teva, the ark, but didn't go where his mission was. His mission was to go out and find out if the water, well, actually, we don't know what his mission was, or its mission was.
Well, here they assume that the mission was.
Right. The assumption is the mission was to go out and find out the information that the Yonah would eventually, right? Reading the Orev's mission against the Yonah's mission, the raven's mission against the dove's mission. So it says the raven didn't go. Shaya choshdo. This is a crazy thing. We're not going to go into it, but that the raven was nervous about leaving Mrs. Raven with Noah, right?
The raven doesn't trust Noah. Right?
The raven, there's a mistrust between the two of them. Now,
Like, not only do they not have a relationship, as we saw in the Torah, but there's a negative relationship that's indicated here, and we'll see this in other places.
But here's the mission changes, by the way. So this is about the mission. This is what was the raven. This is the second part of a Breshi Rabbah Midrash. It says, what does it say? What does it mean when it says until the drying up of the land? Right. So the raven was sent out until the drying up of the land. So the meaning of that is probably right that the purpose of the was to see whether the lands had dried up, not until. Right, to see had they dried up yet. But the words literally mean until the drying up of the land. And that leads the Midrash to say this in Breshi Rabbah. Muchan haya orev l'shlichut acheret. That the orev, the raven, had been set aside already, predestined for a completely different mission. That was not at that moment, but for a future moment. When in the time of Elijah the prophet, Elijah would be running away from the queen who was trying to kill him, and he was hiding in the Midbar in the desert. And there was no one to bring him food, right? And the Oravim, the ravens, brought meat and bread to Elijah the prophet. Right? And it came at a time when there was an Atzirat Gishamim, when there was a drought, there wasn't any rain. And so the Orev, or the raven, as it were, in the Midrashic mind, didn't fulfill its mission here because it wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to finish its mission at another time of the drying up of the waters, which was to be in the future, at the time of Elijah the prophet, where the Orev would be more positively spun as one who brought bread and meat to a hungry and scared prophet. And so the Midrash kind of fills in like this mysterious verse is almost like I'm sorry, I can't go out and find out if the waters have stopped because I'm on my
way.
I have a
forward in time.
Way future in time.
But it's literally is a perfect bookend because here we have an abundance of waters and there we have a drought, right? And in both places we have ravens.
Yeah.
I said my point.
Okay. All right, now, well, we just want to underscore the lack of trust because we could get stuck on the beauty of that Midrash. We just want you guys to see that this has been bothering other people before us, and that it bothered. Right, this is just the Talmud that Rashi quotes. We wanted you to see it inside. And see that they hated each other, meaning there's a midrashic idea that there's a kind of lack of intimacy that is born from the terseness of the verse and the irregularity of it. So in Sanhedrin 108b in the Talmud it says, "Vayshalach orev, Amar Reish Lakish." Reish Lakish said, "Can you all see this in the English? I'm going to read it though in the right side. You can read it along in the English on the left. Amar lo." Amar Reish Lakish, Tshuva nitzchat heshiva ha'orev lenoach. There was a really good answer, a convincing answer was given, a winning answer was given by the Orev, the raven to Noah. So already, by the way, the Midrash, like the rabbis are imagining that they're not getting along, like they're having some kind of acrimonious debate. Amar lo, Rabbecha son ani v'atas natani. So Reish Lakish says the raven said to Noah, your master, meaning God, hates me, and you hate me. Imagine this is like in the first millennium, right? We're talking about like 6th, 7th, 8th century, right? First of all, Rab Chasson ani minat taharin shiva minat tameim shnayim. So I'm one of the birds that later on in the book of Leviticus will be considered to be a tameh or impure bird because I eat carrion or whatever it is, right? So it's not fair. All of the holy, the pure birds come in 7 by 7, 7 of them at a time, right? Come to the ark, but only with us, we're tameim, we only get 2, right? So what's with it, God? Why did you only bring 2 of us onto the? V'atas neitani, you also hate me. Shata meniach mimin shiv'ah v'sholech mimin shnayim. So the raven was standing there going, really? You want to send me out over there to see if the waters? What if I don't make it? You know, like why do you choose me? There are 7 of those type, and there are only 2 of us, right? In pagabi sar chama. What if it's too hot? Pogebi sar chama or sar tzina. If it's too cold, lo nimsa ba'olam. Then he said it's more about survival. Then it's like I'm a rare bird and I don't have any, continuity.
Why are you sending at me out?
Send the one, there are 7 of them and there are 2 of me. And then at the end, that oh Shema leishti atat tzarich, or maybe you are interested in my wife, right? So, crazy, right?
Crazy. Midrashic imagination.
Right. So we can see more of this animosity, Breshit Rabbah, which is a little later source than the Talmud, again, working off each other. The similar conversation. Vayetze Yatzov Hashov in source 6, Rabbi Yudan B'Shem Rabbi Yudah ben Rabbi Shimon Yitchil Mishivot Shuvot said that the raven began to respond from all of the animals. Chayav, oh, Sheesh Kan Einatam Shalech El Ali. Says, why, of all the animals that you're sending here, what do you... Why do you have to do that? So Noah then said, what use does the world have for you? You aren't even a kosher bird to be eaten or offered as a sacrifice. Like you have no purpose, right? So they are really...
They hate each other.
They hate each other. There's just like this enmity between Noah. Now, of course, we could argue very clearly that in the world literature, there's a history of ambivalence about the raven. Certainly, in
the raven's the dark bird.
The dark bird, the bird that eats the dead, and so it's associated with ghosts and so on in Nordic traditions. There's of course the opposite valence, which is that the Orev is prophetic, right? The raven is a prophetic instrument, and it shows up in many cultures in that way as well. But so you see kind of like this, is it in some way also to some degree they're reading the raven against the dove. And the terseness of the verse becomes an indication of this kind of inherent, right? Although we saw the moment there of the mission of the raven, it has a future great mission, right? And that's the reason why the raven is cut short, because it wasn't the right moment for the raven. So that's not necessarily negative, although we did see one scholar say that you can't read the Elijah story as a positive story because it takes place in a place of human wasteland, in a place where there's no cultivation, no life, as it were.
Still and the raven sustaining life there.
That's true, but remember we saw that that his perspective was that the raven across Tanakh is always a negative, and the Jonah, the Yonah, the dove is always a positive. And you'll say, oh, but what about the Elijah story where the raven is feeding Elijah? So in his mind, it actually is not a positive story. It just means it shows you how outside of the pale of that the raven is, right? The only bird that could possibly have done that, and it happened to be, right? So valence of the raven is not good, although we want to read the raven much more positively. But first, maybe some people, and then we'll go to another source about,
Okay, so we have some people online and in the room, Rachel in the room.
Yeah, if the argument is made that the raven wasn't cooperating because it was worried about its mate, he finally goes off alone. So what kind of an argument is that? If he was so darn worried about his mate, he would have hopped back in the ark and protected her.
Rachel, if you were a regular student of Midrash, you wouldn't be trying to make it sort of consistent and realistic in that way. It's just like a wild imaginative voices.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right,
so it doesn't necessarily tie in with the whole.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know very much about birds, but my impression is that the that the raven, though sometimes domesticated, can be domesticated, but it's a high-flying bird. It can
interesting.
go long distances and go high.
Uh-huh.
And the dove is a low-flying bird, doesn't go very far, and comes back again. I mean, there are doves that can go long distances, but they don't go high. They don't have the, long view of things.
Oh, that's
So the
interesting, 'cause that's
raven might be a
consistent.
better bird to see, the earth as a whole,
Got
or
it.
more of the earth. And then the dove is more like on the ground. What's it going to be like when you put your feet,
Got
your feet down?
So the raven is actually then more suited to that long-term mission.
Right. And that first,
That
the
the
first look.
Midrash has it like in terms
Yeah.
of like sustaining Elijah generations to come.
Right.
And the dove is more suited to Noah's mission.
Right. I would
Great,
think
that's
so.
really interesting.
And I
Thank
would
you.
also think that if you want to see earth surrounding you is looking, the raven will be a better
Got
choice for that because it'll be able to see further and higher.
Fascinating,
And then
thank
if you
you.
want to,
Yeah.
step
And it-
down from the ark, the dove is going to give you a better sky.
Okay, thank you.
Can you all hear that, by the way? I'm not sure if the Zoom God can hear it. Were you able to hear that? Yeah? Awesome, okay. Let's take, we have a couple of people. Jay, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom. First on this mad mate thing, it's an interesting precursor to the whole question of Abraham and his worry about his beautiful wife and what's going to happen. So that's kind of an interesting pre-echo. But what I wanted to say along the lines of the biological or whatever behavioral difference between a raven and a dove. One's an omnivore, the other is basically a vegetarian, but the raven is a scavenger. And it seems to me a scavenger is mostly about self-interest. They may fly high, but they keep coming back until they get their prey and their need is resolved, and that's it. The dove may have eaten the olive, being a vegetarian, we don't know, but the dove brings back the branch. So it's much more about a relationship. It's not only self-interest like for a scavenger. For the dove, there may be some kind of already relationship with Noach, as you've pointed out.
Nice. We actually have a midrash that reflects exactly what we were saying about eating the corpse, and we'll hopefully get there.
Exactly, hopefully. But go ahead, let's do Eden and Ronnie, and then we see there's a lot of hands, but we have a lot of sources, friends, so please go ahead, Eden.
Hi, good morning, Shabbat Shalom.
Morning.
Hi, Eden.
Hi. I just want to say, it feels like before the flood, relationship and relationality itself was broken, mostly. Like the relationship between the people and God was completely ruptured. And even the relationship with animals was corrupted as well, right? Like all flesh. And this feels like, even in just the verses without the really amazing creativity of the Midrash, it feels like intimacy and relationship kind of rebuilding with like training wheels in stages. Like the first, the sort of easier, there's less trust with the raven, but there's still something there. And then you build to this intimacy with the dove that even calls up the language of Isaac and Rebecca in the evening. And like, you get really intimate with this stuff. And it feels like kind of a gateway to relationships and trust coming back at the end of this process.
Love that. Thank you, Eden. Love that.
Love it. We're going to piggyback on that actually. And before every comment takes us into the midrashim that we already chose, maybe we'll just look at some of the midrashim and then come back. Keep your hands up, and we're going to go into this crazy text from the Zohar, which is source number 8.
Okay. Do you want to say something about the source?
Well, the Zohar again this is the Zohar. It's Zohar Hadash, which is kind of like a text from the latter part of the 13th century, probably written as and that became additional to the Zoharic literature, the canon of the Zohar. It's again, it's focusing on the mystical, and it's a midrash of sorts, and it's pretty radical. This one is this one blew us
away.
out of the water.
Right.
Like we'll never forget this source.
Okay.
So take a look at this.
Ella Amar Rabbi Chia. So Rabbi Chia said, Lama shalach et ha'orev. Why did Noah send the raven? Amar Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia said, Mitzta'er haba Noach tzvei. So Noah was very upset, or very grieved, over dad da'alma, about the destruction or the loss of the earth, of the world. Amar, Noach said, Ribono shel olam, master of the universe. Yadati ke'atarachu. I know that you are compassionate. V'ata lo vichamta al olamcha. And you didn't have compassion on your world. V'nehefach rachamanutka v'achsarut. And your compassion turned into cruelty. Ata lo vichamta al banecha. And you didn't have compassion on your children. It says there, she'eino merachem al banav, v'nehefach lahem la'achsarit. So it's as if, and I don't totally have the locution here, but someone who emerged compassionate on their children and they became or they transformed to someone who is cruel. And for this, Noah sent the raven. Remez, who did kaf ramaz. That the raven was a hint that hinted at this, at God's cruelty. So again,
it becomes a symbol of almost like a protest. The Orev becomes a protest symbol for
Noah's protest against God.
Right, essentially saying to God, you're like this Orev. Just like you, like apparently the Orev, the raven is not compassionate with its own children, as it were, or whatever, right?
So this emerged when I was studying this morning with Rabbi Sharon Cohen-Asfeld and her husband Shimmy, and you'll see, I think I included on the page, but there's a few verses about in the Bible, one in Psalms and one maybe in Job, about the raven not taking care of their children. You don't have to find it, it's okay. So it's like, so God's not taking care of God's children here. Okay, so now let's see what happens. Amar Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, lo kativ be isadik tamim haya. Isn't it written in the Torah that Noah is a righteous, pure man? The ha'ech hetiach dvarim klapei mala. And how did Noah sort of cast these words towards the heavens, towards God? Amar Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia said, Meirov sa'aro hu damar. He said it from his sort of endless grief about this. The hatnan, as it is taught, Minayin she'ein danim et ha'adam lepitzaro. Where is it that we learn that we don't judge a person when they are in such pain or such grief? And it's interesting because God was also in grief at the beginning of the story. Do we judge God for God's own grief? God's own grief. She'amar, Iyov lo b'dat, as it says in Job, Iyov lo b'dat yidaber dvarav lo behaskel. So Job was not speaking. Job's angry words were not. He was not speaking from, knowledge or consciousness and sort of awareness. Even though Job sort of, said harsh words towards God, ain dino kimazi. We don't judge him like an intentional, like he did these things intentionally. Ela ke'adam below da'at, rather than like a person who is not conscious. Why? Lefitzaro, because of his grief. So in other words, Noah judged God, but Noah is okay. We understand why Noah judged God as cruel, because Noah was in grief.
So in this, the Zohar is answering the question, why do we have a verse about the Orev? And why is it so terse? The Orev was never intended to go for any mission other than to be used as a kind of prop, as a proxy for Noah's rebuke of God. Noah rebukes God in this moment, or in some way rebukes God, and then the Zohar says, like, how could Noah rebuke God? We're told that Noah is an ish tzaddik. He said, righteous people don't rebuke God. And then the Zohar says, no, even righteous people will rebuke God and we forgive them because in the moment of intense grief, he had a complaint with God and it was okay for him to lodge it. And so the Orev now becomes the symbol, even though it's seen as a negative symbol, but it's employed by Noah in this Midrashic mind to shake a finger at God and say, you were supposed to be compassionate and you should have had compassion on the world and you didn't, just like this Orev, this raven, that is not compassionate towards its children. So
it's like when Noah sends forth the raven, Noah is saying, you see, God, you're like this raven. You're not taking care of your children.
And what an amazing, and then the Zohar says, it quotes Job and says, like, even before, after Auschwitz and after, protesting God before there was the Lady Bird digit, like Noah becomes a symbol, and Torah still calls him a tzaddik. He's still a tzaddik. He's angry at God and he's still a tzaddik. Because you don't judge somebody in his
Right,
pain.
there's a
his
room
pain.
for this voice.
Right.
So it doesn't confirm the truth of the voice,
Right.
but it gives it to Noah,
It gives
which
it
means
room.
that the rabbis felt it, right? Or thought it.
So-
That God was cruel.
So so essentially we have here the Orev again being used as a, either the Orev is a negative symbol, or the Orev here also has a positive valence because it's being used to remind human beings that even in their pain, they're allowed to be angry at God, as it were. But certainly the Orev is not seen for the most part, in a good light, right? Now, one of the things here, if you look at source number 11, source number 11 lets us know that Orev, which is used in the Bible is not used as a verb, but it means a raven, right? And this definition, it's known for its ubiquitousness and its crisscrossing the country. They're associated with hearing, and particularly with hearing rumors of the grapevine. And the counterpart is the dove, which is associated with sight, which is why it's used, right? One of the things that was interesting about the way that the dove was used is lir'ot hakalu amayim, we'll see. But certainly this crisscrossing, this ability to be a boundary crosser, right? The raven is both these things. It's both, right, in ill omen and loss, but also it's known as a talking bird. Is borne out more often than not in seeing the raven as only negative and the dove only as positive, which we can look at, and we're not going to have time to look at the source. But you can see it here in Shir Shirim. Yonati b'chagvei asela b'seit, right? Yonati, my dove is the beloved, right? My dove is the beloved, right? Even though ki kolech arev, I didn't see this, for your voice is
Like the
sweet,
raven.
but the word arev, which means sweet, is also orev.
Right.
I never saw that. Okay. It's also used here in 6:9 in Song of Songs. Yonati tamati. It's my dove is tamati. It's perfect, just like Noah is tamim. The negativity of the orev is used, or it's used also by this crazy text from a Hasidic master called the Ishbitzer, where he sees the orev as a representation of kaas, of anger. We'll do this one quickly, and then
I'm going to take more.
And then take
Yeah,
more.
go ahead.
So the Ishbitzer here says, the Ishbitzer again in the 18th century Hasidic Midrash, again, everybody's trying to figure out what's the deal with the orev. Why do we even have it? So the orev is romes al kaas, that the orev, the raven is alluding to anger. And so he gives a symbolic meaning to the orev, just as we did before. And he says in this story, sending out the orev means Noach wanted to send out the midah of kas in the world. He wanted to get rid, to purge the world of anger.
Right.
So God says to him, and so what does it mean that it came, that he came back, that the orev came back? In other words, God was essentially saying that's not a good strategy. Now, of course, it's interesting because God, as Rabbi Sharon, I heard her pointing out, the only one really in the story who's angry is really God, right?
Yeah.
So in other words, God's response might be, something, you might have issues with my anger, but there's a time for anger. There's a time for anger for you as a human. There's a time for divine anger too, maybe. There's a reason that it still exists in the world. So even before Freud, or a little bit before Freud, he was saying you could sublimate, if you have a certain desire, you can replace that desire with a certain energy of anger, as it were. You can stir the same quality and transmute it into anger, and in that way save yourself from the prohibition or the desire for the prohibited through the use of anger. In other words, sometimes anger has its place, right? If it's done appropriately or with intentionality, whatever it might be. And that's what he says, that's what it means. So that it went out back and forth until the drying up of the land. He says, until there are no longer any desires for something that is quote unquote evil or unskillful, that's when we will no longer lead the anger of the raven, as it were. Right? Anyway, so he goes in. So essentially, he's reading this as a kind of exercise of what is, like, again, the raven seen as something that is necessary in a certain amount, but like the dove is the strategy that comes into play when Noah's strategy to rid the world of chaos, of anger, God says, no, you know what, bad idea. Don't send out the raven, right? Now's not the time. We need that energy, right? And almost like an integration model where we need Erev, we need night, we need dark, whatever it is, we need Orev, right? Before we can live in the world of Yonah, we need something more integrated. There's room for it. So do you want
It's so interesting that Noah is called Tamim, is called the pure one, right? Tzaddik Tamim, a righteous tzaddik, a righteous man, a pure one. Maybe in order for Noah to leave the boat, he had to become a little bit impure to build this new world. Like God fell in love with him because he was so pure, but that purity wasn't going to last in the new world. Okay, let's get some comments.
Well, let's just finish with the positive spin that we wanted to take about the redemptive spin of Orev. No?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I want you to do it. This is what Rabbi Claresses was really struggling mightily with this, because I love the direction that we eventually landed, which was that we also were going to spin something slightly about the positive valence of the Orev. In other words, that the entire Orev, the raven and dove story, is a story about the integration of polarities, and that the polarity that in the post flood world, just like in the pre-flood world, right? God, as it were, wanted there to be a kind of, maybe Noah, like God, wanted there to be a world which was at a high level, without any compromise, without any of the stepping stones, without any of the concessions, and that God's own rigidity vis-a-vis that ideal is, will now be compromised. God will eventually make concessions, say, you know what, as you said, God says, you know what, the world is going to have some darkness in it. It's going to have, or whatever.
Human beings are going to eat meat, right? They started as vegetarian in the Garden of Eden, and the Orev and the Yonah mirror Vayi Boker, right? There was God's creation of night and day. And here's the integration in that verse where the Yonah becomes like, a tarif, right? As it were, although not a carrion eater. And also like the Yonah emerging at the time of night. So the Yonah has to become more like the Orev, more like the raven. And Noah, the Tamim one, the pure one, also has to become more like the Orev, right? More impure than he was at the start of the story.
And the way that the Zohar says that his anger vis-a-vis God has room, right? For God who is angry, is like to make concessions that human beings are not perfect, even though he's called Tamim, right? He's not perfect either. And the Yonah, even as it's quote unquote Tamim, is not perfect either, because as it said, it's terrific. It tears, right? It tears the leaf. So an odd word. So like the notion that Erev, right? That there's place for night and for the shadow and for
an integration of poles,
right? So that's opposites. Exactly. So that's the way that you wanted to read this story, that I want to read the story, and it's borne out when we see that the first use of the word Orev or Erev, the same letters, is that it's evening and then it's morning, right? And then in the second to last source here, the Midrash associates that when he sent out the Orev, he sent out this raven, it associates it with the plague of darkness in the land of Egypt. Right, that there's a plague of darkness that affects the Rishaim, the people who are the oppressors, and those that there's room in the world for this kind of, for something that isn't always positive necessarily, but also has the need for, right, prophecy comes from the dark and so on. All these
Noah wants
things.
to purge the darkness, but he can't.
He can't. Right.
He can't do that and have a post-ark world, a post-flood world. Right. He can't have both.
Right. So we're going to stop here. We have comments in the room and in the Zoom, and there are many. So let's move through Batya and then Alina. Yeah, and then, Yeah.
So there's one way of seeing the world from a couple of generations. But if the flood then, and of course a long time ago, and Auschwitz and the Holocaust now. I mean, that is a huge deficit, if you look at it that way, about Hashem. However, if you believe in reincarnation, that's the only way I can become pacified, that all those that were killed, murdered, had in previous incarnations reason for it. You know what I'm saying?
That's your Noach in the world. That's your comfort. That's
my
reincarnation.
So you know that in the 16th century, the Ari, Isaac Luria said the same thing about the generation of the flood. He said the generation of the flood all reincarnated to become the generation of the Midbar, of the desert. And he reads Moses as a reincarnation of Noach. This is in the 16th century. And he connects it, you know, they both were in a teva. Like Noah is in a teva, the word used for ark is teva, and Moses is also placed into a teva in the I guess the second chapter.
It's interesting. No, Moses is never described as a Sadiq or Tamim.
That's true.
And Judaism believes in reincarnation.
Well, certainly one part of Judaism.
Judaism is not univocal. Does not have one voice. But let's go on. Let's go on. We gotta go on.
Beautiful, Bhakti. Thank you, Bhakti. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay,
So
Alina.
I'm trying to make sense of this, and what I came to was like that the Jews were asking the question of anger and how do we deal with anger? And in a sense, when they say you wanted my mate, it's like you only want that opposite of me, that loving part of me. You don't, like it's almost like you want to separate, and my whole issue about you wanted to sleep with my mate would be that opposite side. And it's like it feels like they're grappling with the question of anger and where do we put that and how do we integrate and allow for it.
Yeah, that's interesting. So there's lots of anger between the raven and Noah.
Yeah.
In the Midrashic imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like the question of anger and where does it go? And where are we allowed to have it? And it just seems like
and Noah much more easily relates to the dove. It's easier to relate to the dove than to the raven.
But it's also
for all of us,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. But it's also that opposite part. We can't have one without the other in a certain sense.
Yeah. Nice.
There was there are some commentators who say that, which is not true, I think, but we saw that this wasn't true, but it's certainly in the tradition says that essentially the raven will often leave and not come back, right? Remember we saw that?
Right.
And it's not actually true. Science shows that ravens actually come back too, but like there is this idea that in over the last 2 millennia trying to grapple with the story, that the story's about the loyalty of the dove, that the dove always comes back to her lover, that doves, as it were in the tradition, are always loyal to their monogamous. By the way, ravens are also monogamous, but there is this trope that in this story, the loyalty and the love between them is the kind of analog of the covenant of the rainbow that will come, where God says, I won't leave you ever again. Just like the Yonah will go away and come back. God says, I'll go away and come back. And that's also there. It's not just about the anger, but there's a lot of moments here. So let's go.
You know what? God struggles with staying with God's children all throughout the Torah. Right? God says to Moses, I want to destroy all the Israelites and start again with you. Right? And that's a repeated trope, like God's sort of destructive force and not being able to stay with the vulnerability and imperfection of God's children. And that's what we have in the story of Noah. Okay, Tomas. We can't hear you.
Still can't.
It says you're muted, I think.
There you go.
How about now? Any better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I'm like a disloyal raven in my black sweater. 2 wild thoughts, very briefly. The first is just an impulse to just radically defend that raven, because I feel like the compilers of these texts familiar with the animal world, the raven is the most intelligent bird other than the Australian magpie, which occupies the same niche. It lives 40 years. Evidence of its intelligence, and in a discourse of face-to-face, it's important, is that ravens recognize people after intervals of 5, 10, 15 years. They have a memory for faces, and they have an attitude towards the people they recognize. Irritation, affection, they are remarkable. There's a reason that you need to keep them in the Tower of London, otherwise the monarchy falls. So they're just revered and feared animals, especially in the Anglo-Saxon tradition.
And relational, it sounds like profound.
Radically relational animals. Like they see our faces and remember them after decades.
Wow.
That must mean something. And if I was Noah, I would definitely send a raven. You know, pigeons are not so smart as we see in the city around us. And even if they're colored white.
They've done a pretty good job.
So it's one to puzzle over. And then just one last wild association. The Urim and the Thummim, when I first studied them, those mysterious artifacts of divination, lights and perfections. Again, in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, you sort of hear a lot about Hugin and Munin, which are the names of Odin's ravens. And it's only a sonic coincidence. But one translates as thought, and one translates as mind. And I don't really know what that means, but I just love the reminder that the thought is not the mind, and the mind is not what it thinks. And the distinction between these two expressions of observation and divination, which, you know, Odin has that duality. And so maybe in the sense that everything that rises converges, the duality of the Urim and the Thummim, the duality of the Hugin and the Munin, maybe it's just not only a sonic connection.
What's amazing is that Thomas, the word Thomas comes from the word Tamim, and which means like ta'om, like to be like twins, and also Tamim meaning unblemished.
Oh.
And Tumim is from also the same word that's used to describe the dove. And it's interesting that the other side of it is Urim, light, but the Orev is dark. There's a lot in there about this duality that's playing out, and about how, I mean, our tradition has a field day with the beauty of the dark, right? The rabbis say that it's not a coincidence that we see out of the dark part of the eye, and that darkness is a prerequisite for revelation, and that there was darkness before there was light, as it were. Pre-light, as it were. There was choshech. So I think there's something very beautiful about what you're raising up around the Orev, and around, I think, what Rabbi Kolaratsis and I were trying to say about around how the tradition saw the Orev, but like how the tradition also undermined itself, because it appears in so many places as a necessary component of revelation, as a necessary component of the future. So it's really wow.
And I love the line, everything that arises converges. Right, that could have been the name of the whole session.
I'm into that. Thank you, rabbis.
Thank you.
Yeah, Thomas, thank you for the tzmimut. Paul, go ahead. Paul in the room.
I think Rabbi Edgar Allan Poe might have had the answer, which is the raven was sent because the raven demanded to be sent. It was tapping on the chamber door.
Ooh, love that.
Saying nevermore. Tapping on the chamber door.
Never more a flood.
Right. Exactly.
Never more a flood.
Right.
We actually had that poem, but it was
too long.
Way too long.
But thank you. Tapping on the chamber door, yes.
I have to run. There's a bat mitzvah this morning, but I think
I'll run a couple more minutes.
A couple more minutes, yeah, sure. And you can see that we didn't scratch the surface. I feel like we could have
gone so much more
here.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Let's see. I can only hear one more person.
It was Ronnie from before. And
Ronnie. Okay, Nehemiah still has his hands up. Okay.
Shabbat Shalom. So good to be with all of you again, Kehila Kedusha.
Welcome back.
It's very personal for me, the name Noach. First of all, one of the 7 tzaddikim that carried the lineage of Kabbalah according to Yehuda Halevi. But Noach, Rabbi Noach, Dr. Noach Salomon was my first rabbi, 76 to 77. I was sitting on his table every Shabbat. And there I got my connection to the Torah and to Kabbalah. Now, for the story, I want to confirm to make it even stronger, that every animal and every human being have a mission we don't know. The bad people live in God's world. We don't understand it because we don't understand it. And the example is David, actually. David complained to God, God, why did you create the wasp? What do you use this for wasp? And God doesn't say anything. And then David is in the cave and Saul is looking for him. and he's hiding. And when he gets out, Avner, who is much bigger than David, at his sleep, closes legs on David's leg. And David won't be able to run. In the morning, finished. And then a wasp come and bite on Avner's foot, and he release the leg, and David ran away, and we have a David. So the wasp is responsible that we have a David.
Great. Thank you, Nefemia.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So the wasp has a shlichut, a mission, and the raven has a mission. Excellent.
I'm going to leave
And
with,
every one of us have a mission.
yeah.
Oh, good.
The
I'm
dead
so
people
glad.
have a mission.
I'm just going to leave with a teaching from the one of the people that we studied from Israel, who said that the stages of the Jonah, which we didn't get to, the Yonah stages, he said were analogous to a child leaving, the parents, and said, like, in the beginning they go off and test their autonomy, and then they come back, and then so on and so on, and then finally, right, there's radical independence or whatever, some version of independence, and that's also where the flood story is trying to speak about humanity's independence, as it were. Like we've been set adrift, as it were, in a good way and in challenging ways. Immediately after this comes the Tower of Babel story, the Babel story, which is also a story of humanity's efforts and agency being turned unfortunately, in the wrong direction. And I think that a lot of people were highlighting the climate crisis and talking about humanity now and our relationship with the world. And it's really a moment to say that our radical independence has led us to the brink in certain ways. And so I'm hoping that we see the dove soon. And that signals a much healthier interdependence between humanity and the world in which we live. Yesh koach, everybody. Beautiful, Rabbi Orestes. Beautiful teaching with you, laughing with you, exploring with all of you. So much fun. Shabbos, everybody. Shabbos.
Shalom, יישר כוח.
This. Oh, lead meeting. And lead meeting here.